My stepchildren stared me dead in the face and said, "You're just a glorified wallet to us. Quit playing house." So, I stopped being their safety net, canceled their luxury perks, and went completely ghost. When they finally panicked and tracked me down, their biological mother already knew the devastating truth. Grace adjusted the tulle of her gown, her reflection glaring back at me through the floor-to-ceiling mirror. "You don't belong in these pictures," she said. I froze. "What?" "My name is Serena Cole. I had been married to Daniel for a decade. His kids, Connor and Grace, treated me like a temporary babysitter who had overstayed her welcome since the day I moved into their Chicago townhouse. I stayed up until 2:00 a.m., helping with science projects, drove through blizzards to pediatricians, and navigated college admissions. I funded summer camps, races, and car repairs. When Daniel spent 8 months unemployed, I drained my stock portfolio to keep the townhouse from foreclosure. Their biological mother, Diane, was a ghost who only materialized for holidays with cheap gifts for social media. I never demanded they love me. I only wanted basic human decency. That afternoon, at a luxury bridal boutique on Oak Street, I lost whatever delusion I had left. The air smelled like vanilla and expensive dry cleaning. Grace was getting fitted for a $6,500 Vera Wang dress I had put on my American Express card 3 weeks prior. The boutique's photographer was snapping candid moments and asked the mothers to step up for a champagne toast photo. I took a step forward, holding my flute. Grace held up her hand. "Stop! You always do this. You act like you're actually family." The boutique went dead silent. The photographer slowly lowered his camera. I glanced at Daniel, sitting on a velvet sofa across the room. He didn't look up from his phone. His thumb just kept scrolling. Connor leaned against a rack of bridesmaid dresses and scoffed. "She's right. You're just a glorified wallet to us. Quit playing house." It wasn't yelled. It was stated like a boring, undeniable fact. Diane stood next to the pedestal, adjusting Grace's veil. A smug smile plastered across her face. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. "Is that the consensus?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. I looked at the three of them. Grace rolled her eyes, turning back to the mirror to admire her neckline. "You paid for things because you wanted to look like the savior. We never asked for your charity." Daniel sighed heavily. He finally put the phone down, looking at me like I was a toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. "Serena, please, just read the room. Don't ruin her special day with your dramatic sensitivity. 10 years of sacrificing my peace, and this was the moment Daniel chose to coddle his daughter's cruelty rather than defend my honor. He didn't reprimand her. He didn't even flinch. He just wanted me to shut up and pay the balance." I set the champagne flute on a small glass table. It clinked softly. I didn't shed a tear or raise my voice. For a decade, I financed Connor's aviation lessons, Grace's out-of-state tuition, and the very roof over their heads from my private consulting business. I did it because I was desperate to build a cohesive home. I absorbed their resentment and Daniel's indifference because I thought love was measured in endurance. I was wrong. I turned on my heel and walked out. The heavy glass door of the boutique clicked shut behind me, cutting off the soft jazz playing inside. The Chicago air was sharp. I hailed a cab and went straight to my downtown office. I didn't go to the townhouse. I didn't pack a bag from our bedroom. I locked my office door, sat at my mahogany desk, and opened my laptop. I didn't have a pre-made folder of receipts or a revenge plan. I just had the master spreadsheet I used to manage the family's financial existence. It was called Household 2026. At 4:15 p.m., I started clicking. It felt entirely clinical, like I was auditing a failing company. First line item, the $35,000 deposit for Grace's wedding at the Botanical Gardens. I opened the vendor portal, triggered the cancellation clause, and requested the 80% refund to my sole business account. Second line item, Connor's Flight Academy. He had a $4,200 installment processing on Monday. I logged into the Academy's payment portal, removed my routing numbers, and clicked Disenroll Student. Third line item, the shared platinum card Daniel used for his golf outings, his client lunches, and his endless subscriptions. I logged into the app, reported the card lost, and requested a new one be mailed to my office. Then, I froze his authorized user status. I packed a single carry-on bag from my office closet. I kept a week's worth of professional clothes there for sudden business trips. I booked a red-eye flight to Paris, leaving from O'Hare International Airport in 3 hours. By 7:30 p.m., I was sitting at a terminal bar in Terminal 5, sipping a gin and tonic. The ice was melting against the glass. My phone screen lit up. The venue cancellation and flight school notice had obviously bounced back to Daniel's email. I watched the notifications stack up. 3 missed calls, 10 text messages, then 20. Suddenly, I heard heavy footsteps slapping against the tile. I turned to see Daniel marching toward my gate. His tie was loosened, and his forehead was slick with sweat. He must have used the family locator app to track my phone before I thought to disable it. He looked frantic, not sad, not apologetic, panicked. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he hissed, grabbing my shoulder. I calmly brushed his hand away. "Don't touch me. The wedding planner is threatening to drop us," he barked, his voice echoing in the terminal, drawing stares from a family eating pretzels nearby. Margot just called me in tears. Connor's flight instructor emailed saying he's locked out of the hangar. "Fix this right now." "I'm no longer playing house, Daniel," I said. I took a sip of my drink. "I'm taking my wallet and leaving. You're destroying my kids' lives over one petty comment." I looked at him, really looked at him. The graying hair, the expensive watch I bought for his 40th birthday, the absolute entitlement radiating off his skin. "They aren't my kids," I replied softly, feeling a massive weight lift from my chest. "They made that perfectly clear today. And you aren't my partner. You're just a bystander who liked the financial perks." "Serena, stop this," he demanded, leaning over the bar. "You're embarrassing yourself. Cancel whatever you just did. Diane is laughing at us. Grace is hysterical. Let Diane pay for the Botanical Gardens. I'm boarding." I picked up my bag, walked to the scanner, and handed the agent my boarding pass. Daniel stood there, his mouth open, watching the glass doors slide shut behind me. I pulled my phone out, turned off location sharing, and powered it down. When I landed at Charles de Gaulle the next morning, the sky was a bruised purple. I bought a French SIM card at a kiosk, popped out my American one, and slipped it into a side pocket of my purse. The silence was immediate and intoxicating. No alerts about an overdrawn joint checking account. No passive-aggressive texts from Grace asking for Venmo transfers. I rented a small, furnished apartment in the Marai district. For the first 2 weeks, I did nothing but sleep, drink espresso, and walk along the Seine. I ran my consulting business remotely, communicating with my clients through encrypted email. I felt lighter. The constant knot of anxiety in my stomach, the one that had lived there for 10 years, waiting for the next crisis, the next complaint, the next demand for money, was gone. But 10 years of legal and financial enmeshment don't just vanish because you cross an ocean. On my 15th day in Paris, I was sitting at a small zinc table outside a cafe, eating a croissant, when an email popped up on my encrypted server. It was from Silas Mercer, my corporate attorney in Chicago. The subject line read, "Urgent, temporary injunction on Cole Consulting accounts." I set my coffee cup down. The ceramic clicked sharply against the metal table. I opened the email. Daniel hadn't just panicked. He had hired a lawyer. According to the attached PDF, Daniel had filed an emergency motion in family court claiming that I had abandoned the marital home and was maliciously liquidating marital assets. He was petitioning to freeze my business operating accounts. I dialed Silas immediately. "Tell me this is a joke," I said when he answered. "It's not a joke, Serena, but it is a massive overreach," Silas said, his voice carrying the calm, flat cadence of a man who dealt with messy divorces for a living. "He's claiming the consulting business is a joint asset because you operated it during the marriage." "We have a prenup," I said, my pulse ticking in my throat. "A bulletproof one. The business is mine. The initial capital was mine. I know that, and you know that. But he found a judge willing to grant a temporary 48-hour freeze until we can present the prenup and swat this down. He's trying to starve you out. He wants you to miss payroll on Friday, so you're forced to come back to the table and negotiate." I stared at a pigeon picking at a crumb on the cobblestones. Daniel was using my own employees as hostages. He knew I had 5 consultants relying on their direct deposits at the end of the week. "What else?" I asked. Silas hesitated. "He's also filed a motion seeking spousal support. He's claiming your sudden departure has left him destitute and unable to maintain his standard of living." "His standard of living?" I let out a dry, bitter laugh. "His standard of living was entirely funded by my guilt. Does he have a job yet?" "According to the filing, no. He's claiming emotional distresses from the sudden separation is preventing him from seeking employment." "Silas, unfreeze my accounts. File whatever you need to file. Countersue for the townhouse. I paid the mortgage out of my separate accounts for 8 months. I want it all untangled. Every cent. I'll get it done," Silas said. "But Serena," he's angry. "And people like Daniel, when they lose their safety net, they don't reflect on their behavior. They just look for someone else to blame. Be careful." I hung up. The cold Paris air suddenly felt a lot less romantic. I wasn't just dealing with an ungrateful family anymore. I was dealing with a man cornered by his own incompetence. Later that evening, I sat in the dim light of my rented apartment, reviewing the bank statements Silas had sent over as part of the discovery process. While my business accounts were temporarily frozen, I still had access to the read-only versions of the joint household account, the one I had stopped funding. The balance was currently negative $400. I scrolled through the recent transactions. In the 2 weeks since I left, Daniel hadn't cut back. There were charges for premium steakhouses, a $200 bar tab, and an Uber Black ride. But what caught my eye was a cleared check. Check #1042. Amount $15,000. I pulled up the scanned image of the check. It was made out to Diane. The memo line read, "Wedding bridge loan." I stared at the screen, my eyes burning. Daniel didn't have $15,000. The joint account certainly didn't have it, which meant he had taken a cash advance from the one credit card I hadn't managed to cancel yet, a high-interest card tied to the townhouse equity. He had plunged himself into debt to pay his ex-wife to save face for a wedding I was no longer funding. But why did Diane need a bridge loan? Diane had spent the last 10 years boasting on Facebook about her successful boutique marketing firm. She drove a leased Range Rover and wore designer clothes. If she was so successful, why was Daniel taking out equity cash to pay her? I opened a new tab on my browser. I wasn't going to just sit in Paris and wait for Silas to untangle the mess. I needed leverage. I started digging into Diane's business filings in the Illinois State database. It took me an hour of cross-referencing public records to find what I was looking for. Diane's marketing firm wasn't successful. It had been administratively dissolved 3 years ago for failing to pay state taxes. There was a knock on my apartment door. I jumped, slamming the laptop shut. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't given this address to anyone but Silas. The knock came again. 2 sharp raps. I walked quietly to the door and peered through the peephole. Standing in the poorly lit hallway of the Parisian apartment building was Grace. She looked exhausted, her hair messy, wearing a heavy wool coat that looked entirely out of place in the mild weather. She was holding a manila envelope. I didn't open the door. I just stood there, breathing quietly. "I know you're in there, Serena." Grace's muffled voice came through the thick wood. It didn't sound arrogant or cruel like it had in the bridal boutique. It sounded small. It sounded terrified. Silas's paralegal took pity on me. "Please open the door. Dad doesn't know I'm here." I unlatched the deadbolt and pulled the door open just enough to see her clearly. Grace was shivering. The temperature in Paris was in the low 60s, but she looked like she had just walked through a blizzard. Her eyes were red-rimmed, the skin around them puffy and raw. The Vera Wong bridal glow was completely gone, replaced by the terrified pallor of a 22-year-old who had just collided with the real world at terminal velocity. I didn't step aside immediately. I kept my hand on the brass doorknob. "How did you afford a flight to Paris, Grace?" "I sold my engagement ring," she whispered, her voice cracked, "to a pawn shop in the Loop for a quarter of what it's worth. Just let me in, Serena. Please. I haven't slept in 2 days." I opened the door fully. She stepped past me into the small living room, dropping her heavy wool coat onto the arm of a velvet chair. She looked around the apartment, taking in the exposed beams and the small kitchenette, before her eyes landed on the zinc table where my laptop was still open to the joint bank account statements. She walked over to the table and and dropped the manila envelope next to my coffee cup. It hit the metal with a heavy, flat smack. "Sit down," I said, pointing to the chair opposite mine. I walked over to the kitchenette and poured her a glass of water from the tap. I set it in front of her. I didn't offer her tea. I didn't offer a hug. The urge to comfort her, an instinct I had cultivated for 10 years, was still there, buried somewhere under the bruised ribs of my chest, but I refused to let it surface. I was not playing house. Grace picked up the glass with both hands. They were shaking so badly the water rippled. She took a sip, set it down, and stared at the envelope. "The wedding is off," she said quietly. "The botanical gardens sent the formal cancellation notice on Tuesday. Dad tried to put a new deposit down with a different credit card, but it declined. The planner quit. And Marcus," she swallowed hard, mentioning her fiancé. "Marcus called it off. His parents found out about the venue and the money issues. They did a background check on my mom, on Diane." I sat back in my chair, crossing my arms. "And what did Marcus's parents find out?" Grace reached out and untwisted the string tie on the manila envelope. She tipped it upside down. A thick stack of papers slid out onto the table. They weren't wedding brochures or venue contracts. They were bank statements, collection notices, and letters from the heirs. "They found out that I have a credit score of 410, Grace said, her voice dropping to a hollow whisper. "They found out I have $85,000 in defaulted loans, unpaid credit card debt, and state tax liens, all under my social security number." I leaned forward, pulling the top document toward me. It was a final notice from a commercial lender for a small business loan. The business name was listed as Diane's Marketing and Media LLC. The guarantor on the loan was Grace Cole. The date of origination was 3 years ago. Grace would have been 19. "She used your identity," I said, stating it as a flat fact. I flipped to the next page. A credit card statement from Chase, maxed out at $20,000. Next page. A tax penalty notice from the state of Illinois. She told me she needed a co-signer for a small bridge loan a few years ago. Grace sobbed, the tears finally spilling over her lashes. She said it was just a formality because her business was expanding so fast. She took me to lunch, bought me a pair of designer shoes, and slid a tablet across the table for me to sign. "I didn't read it, Serena. She's my mother." "Why would I read it?" "Because your mother has always been a grifter," I said coldly. I didn't care if it stung. We were far past the point of polite fiction. "And your father?" Grace put her head in her hands, her shoulders heaving. "He knew. He found out a month ago, before the bridal boutique, before everything. Diane called him crying, saying the creditors were going to garnish her accounts and it would trace back to me. She told him if he didn't give her $15,000 to get the most aggressive lenders off her back, I would find out right before the wedding. She blackmailed him." The pieces clicked together with sickening precision. Check #1042. The $15,000 cash advance Daniel took out on the townhouse equity. He wasn't paying Diane alone. He was paying her a ransom to keep Grace's stolen identity a secret until after she was safely married to Marcus, whose wealthy family would hopefully never look too closely at Grace's credit history. But I had canceled the wedding deposit. The house of cards had lost its primary structural support and everything had collapsed. "Why did you come here, Grace?" I asked. "What do you want from me?" She looked up, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "You're the only one who knows how to fix things like this. Dad is losing his mind. He's drinking. He won't answer Silas's calls. He just keeps screaming that you ruined everything by leaving. But I know it wasn't you. It was them. Please, Serena, the collection agencies are threatening to sue me. Marcus won't even speak to me. I'm 22 and my life is over. I need you to help me fix my credit. I need you to hire a lawyer to make this go away." She pushed the pile of papers toward me, a desperate, childish hope in her eyes. It was the same look she gave me when she was 15 and crashed Daniel's car into a mailbox, begging me to handle the insurance so her dad wouldn't yell. I looked at the papers. Then I looked at her. "No." Grace blinked, the tears momentarily stopping. "What?" I said no, I replied, my voice steady. "I'm not fixing this. But you have the money. You have your consulting business. You could pay off the immediate collections, and we could set up a payment plan." "I am not paying off debt that your mother fraudulently accumulated," I interrupted, standing up from the table. I walked to the window and looked down at the dark, narrow street. A couple was walking a small dog under the glow of a street lamp. Ordinary life, and I am not hiring a lawyer to sweep this under the rug. Then what am I supposed to do? Grace's voice pitched upwards, edging into a hysterical scream. "I have $85,000 in debt. I don't even have a job yet." I turned back to face her. "You do exactly what any other victim of identity theft does. You walk into a police station, and you file a felony fraud report against Diane. You hand them these documents, you freeze your credit, and you dispute every single charge as fraudulent." Grace recoiled as if I had slapped her. "I can't do that. Dad said if I report it, the police will arrest her. She'll go to prison, Serena." "Yes, she probably will," I said. "Identity theft across state lines, wire fraud, and tax evasion usually carry a prison sentence. She's my mother, and you were her cash cow." I shot back, the anger finally bleeding into my voice. "While you and Connor were standing in a Vera Wong boutique treating me like dirt, telling me I was just a glorified wallet, your biological mother was literally using your social security number as a piggy bank. You defended the woman who ruined your financial future, and you alienated the woman who paid for your entire life." Grace shrank back in the chair. She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. The truth of it hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "Dad won't let me," she finally whispered. "He said we keep this in the family. He said if I go to the police, it'll drag him into it, because he knew and tried to pay her off. He said it makes him an accessory." I let out a sharp breath. Daniel wasn't trying to protect Diane. He was trying to protect himself. If Grace filed a police report, the investigation would uncover the $15,000 check. It would prove Daniel knew about the felony and used marital funds, my home's equity, to cover it up. Suddenly, the frozen business accounts made perfect sense. Daniel wasn't just trying to starve me out of a divorce settlement. He was trying to drain me of resources so completely that I wouldn't be able to hire forensic accountants to look into the townhouse equity line. He was buying time to hide his own complicity. Grace's phone lit up on the table. It began to vibrate against the metal, a harsh, buzzing sound that filled the quiet quiet apartment. We both looked down. The caller ID read Dad. Grace stared at it, paralyzed. The phone buzzed for a full 20 seconds before going dark. A moment later, a text message chimed. Then another. Then 3 in rapid succession. Grace slowly reached out and tapped the screen to open the messages. I watched the color drain completely from her face. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a new, different kind of panic. What does it say, I asked. She turned the phone around so I could see the screen. The texts were from Daniel. Where are you? Connor's car is gone. His closet is empty. Did you give him the money? Tell me you didn't give him the money. I frowned, looking from the screen to Grace. What money? Grace pulled the phone back, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped it. She swallowed, refusing to meet my eyes. Grace, I said, my tone dropping an octave. What money is your father talking about? Before I left, she stammered, staring at her knees. Before I went to the pawn shop, I found something in Dad's desk when I was looking for the loan documents. What did you find? A cashier's check, she whispered, for $25,000, made out to cash. The receipt attached to it was from your joint savings account, the one you used for emergencies. The date on it was the day after you left for Paris. My stomach plummeted. The emergency fund. It was an account I had kept at a local credit union, completely separate from the main household ledger, specifically meant to cover a medical disaster or an unexpected tax bill. I hadn't checked it because I assumed Daniel didn't have the routing numbers. I was wrong. And where is the check now? I asked, though the sinking feeling in my gut already told me the answer. Connor took it, Grace said, finally looking up at me, tears streaming down her face again. He said Dad owed us for ruining everything. He said since he got kicked out of flight school, he was taking the money to move to Arizona and start over. I didn't stop him. I walked back to my laptop, opened a new tab, and logged into the credit union portal. The loading circle spun for 3 agonizing seconds before the dashboard appeared. Available balance. More cents. Daniel had raided the emergency fund the moment I boarded my flight. He had converted it into a cashier's check to hide it from the temporary freeze he knew he was about to request on my other accounts. And now, his entitled, 20-year-old son had stolen the stolen money and vanished. He's going to call the police on Connor, isn't he? Grace asked, her voice cracking. He'll report the check stolen. He can't, I said, staring blankly at the screen. Why not? Because your father didn't just drain the account, Grace. He violated a court order. If he admits he had that cashier's check, he has to explain to the family court judge why he hid $25,000 in marital assets, while simultaneously swearing under oath that he was destitute and needed spousal support. I closed the laptop with a definitive snap. The situation hadn't just escalated. It had metastasized into a complete legal nightmare. Daniel was committing perjury. Diane was committing fraud. Connor had committed grand larceny. And Grace was sitting in my Paris apartment, a fugitive from her own ruined life, begging the woman she despised to save her from her own parents. My phone, sitting next to the laptop, suddenly vibrated. It wasn't an email from Silas. It was an international call from a Chicago area code. It wasn't Daniel's number. I picked it up and answered. Hello? Serena Cole? A woman's voice asked. It was sharp, professional, and entirely unfamiliar. Yes, who is this? My name is Detective Claire Voss with the Chicago Police Department Financial Crimes Unit, she said. The connection crackled slightly. I'm trying to locate a Grace Cole. We have a warrant for her arrest regarding multiple counts of bank fraud, and her father stated she might be with you. I didn't say anything for a long 3 seconds. I just looked at Grace, who was staring back at me, her red-rimmed eyes wide with an animal kind of terror. She didn't know the exact words being spoken, but she could read the sudden, absolute zero drop in my expression. Detective Voss, I said, my voice carefully measured. How exactly did you get this number? Your husband provided it, Voss replied. Her tone was brisk, practiced. He also provided the address to your rental in the Murray district. He contacted our unit an hour ago to inform us that his daughter had fled the country to avoid questioning, and that he believed she was seeking shelter with you to help liquidate your business assets. A cold, ugly laugh bubbled up in the back of my throat, but I swallowed it. Daniel hadn't just thrown his daughter under the bus, he had tied her to the bumper and hit the gas. He gave them my exact address to make it look like I was the one harboring her. It was a calculated move to drag me into the criminal investigation, painting me as an accomplice to his fugitive daughter while he sat safely in Chicago playing the worried, innocent patriarch. Detective, I said, standing up and walking away from the table, turning my back to Grace. My estranged husband is currently facing multiple civil filings for asset theft, perjury, and violating a family court freeze order. I strongly advise you to look at his bank records from the last 48 hours before you take his tips as gospel. Noted, Miss Cole, Voss said, entirely unfazed. But right now, my warrant is for Grace Cole. Is she in your apartment? I looked out the window at the Parisian street below. The rain had started to fall, slicking the cobblestones. If I lied to a police detective, I committed a crime. If I told the truth, I was holding a fugitive. I had spent 10 years cleaning up Daniel's messes, absorbing the legal and financial blows for his family. I was not doing it again. I have a young woman in my living room who showed up unannounced 20 minutes ago, I said clearly. She is in a state of severe distress. I am going to contact my attorney, Silas Mercer. I suggest you call him as well. After I speak with him, I will escort her to the United States Embassy here in Paris. You can coordinate with them. I appreciate your cooperation, Miss Cole. Don't let her leave your sight. The line clicked dead. I lowered the phone. The apartment was dead silent except for the faint hum of the small refrigerator in the kitchenette. I turned around. Grace was standing up, her hands clutching the back of the velvet chair so tightly her knuckles were white. Was that the police? That was Detective Claire Voss with the Chicago PD, I said, walking back to the table and picking up my laptop. There is a warrant out for your arrest for bank fraud. Your father gave them my phone number. He gave them my address. He told them you flew here to help me hide money. Grace's knees gave out. She didn't fall gracefully. She collapsed like a dropped marionette, hitting the hardwood floor with a heavy, painful thud. She didn't scream. She just curled in on herself, her forehead resting against the floorboards, pulling her knees to her chest. A low, guttural noise ripped out of her throat, the sound of a child realizing the monsters aren't hiding hiding under the bed. They're the ones tucking her in. He promised, she choked out between gasping sobs. He promised he would handle it. He said he loved me. He loves his comfort, I said, looking down at her. I didn't crouch down. I didn't touch her shoulder. I just stood there, letting the brutal reality of the situation flatten the last of her delusions. He loves his reputation. And right now, you and Connor are liabilities to both. He paid Diane to keep quiet, and when that failed, he used Connor's theft of the $25,000 to buy himself time. Now, he's feeding you to the police to create a distraction. I pulled out my phone and dialed Silas. He answered on the first ring. Silas, I need an international extradition lawyer and I need one 5 minutes ago, I said, skipping the greeting. What happened? Grace is in my apartment. She showed up with a folder full of defaulted loans Diane took out in her name. Daniel knew about it. He used the townhouse equity line to pay Diane off. When it all collapsed, Daniel called the Chicago PD, gave them my address, and told them I was harboring her. Silas let out a long, heavy exhale on the other end of the line. I could hear the scratching of a pen on a legal pad. Serena, listen to me very carefully. Do not give her any money. Do not book her a flight. Do not offer her legal advice. You are in the middle of a vicious, high-stakes divorce with a man who is actively trying to frame you for financial crimes. If you help her, he will argue in court that you conspired with her to hide marital assets. I know, I said. I already told the detective I'm taking her to the U.S. Embassy. Good. Do exactly that. Drop her at the door, tell the consular officer her name, and walk away. But it gets worse. I rubbed my temples. A dull headache was blooming behind my eyes. How could it possibly get worse? Daniel's lawyer just filed an emergency addendum with the family court, Silas said, his voice tightening. He's officially claiming that you drained the $25,000 emergency fund before you fled the country. He filed a sworn affidavit stating that he confronted you about it, which is why you left. And he's claiming Connor took a bus to Arizona because he was so distraught over you stealing his college fund. I stared at the wall. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the lie left me momentarily speechless. Daniel had cashed the check himself. He had left the paper trail at the credit union. He was banking on the fact that my accounts were frozen, and I couldn't access the raw data to prove it before the judge ruled on the permanent asset division. He's daring us to prove him wrong while my hands are tied behind my back, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Exactly, Silas said. He knows the burden of proof is on us to subpoena the credit union's security footage to show it was him cashing that check, not you. That takes weeks. In the meantime, he wants the judge to award him exclusive use of the townhouse and full access to your business operating accounts as restitution. Silas, break the freeze. I don't care what you have to do. Subpoena Diane. Subpoena the pawn shop where Grace sold her ring. Burn his entire narrative to the ground. I'm filing the motions right now, Silas said. Get the kid to the embassy. Protect yourself, Serena. Daniel is a drowning man, and he's trying to pull you under. I hung up the phone. Grace was still on the floor, crying quietly now, her breath hitching in her chest. Get up, I said. She flinched. She slowly pushed herself up off the floor, wiping her face with her sleeves. She looked pathetic. She looked exactly like the terrified 22-year-old she was. But I remembered the bridal boutique. I remembered the smirk on her face when she told me I was just a glorified wallet. I remembered the decade of my life I had poured into a bottomless pit of entitlement. Put your coat on, I told her, grabbing my keys and my purse. We are walking to the embassy. It's a mile and a half from here. What happens when we get there? She asked, her voice shaking. You walk up to the consular desk. You hand them your passport. You tell them your name is Grace Cole, that you are a United States citizen, and that you understand there is an active warrant for your arrest in the state of Illinois. You will request legal counsel and a repatriation flight. They'll arrest me, she whispered, her eyes filling with tears again. They'll put me in handcuffs. Yes, they probably will, I said, opening the apartment door and standing aside. And then you will sit in a holding room, and you will wait for a public defender, and you will tell them exactly what your mother did to you, and exactly how your father tried to cover it up. I don't have anyone, she sobbed, finally refusing to move toward the door. Marcus is gone. My mom ruined me. My dad threw me away. Serena, please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I said in the boutique. I'm sorry for everything. Just don't leave me there alone. It was the first genuine apology I had heard from her in 10 years. It wasn't manipulative. It was the raw, bleeding desperation of someone who had finally hit rock bottom. I looked at her. I felt a brief, agonizing phantom pain in my chest, the ghost of the mother I had tried to be for her, the woman who stayed up until 2 a.m., making sure her college applications were perfect, the woman who paid for the Vera Wong dress. I accept your apology, Grace, I said calmly, but you are not my child. You made that clear, and I am not your wallet. I made that clear. I walked out into the hallway. Are you coming, or do I call the French police to escort you? She swallowed hard, grabbed her wool coat, and followed me out. The walk to the embassy was a blur of wet pavement and gray skies. We didn't speak. Grace walked a few paces behind me, her head down, clutching the manila envelope of her mother's fraud to her chest like a shield. When we finally reached the imposing gates of the United States Embassy near the Place de la Concorde, the security guards eyed us suspiciously. We went through the metal detectors and entered the main consular services hall. It smelled like stale coffee and floor wax. I walked straight up to the thick bulletproof glass of window 4. A man in a blue button-down shirt looked up from his monitor. His name tag read Duncan. Can I help you? He asked, his voice projecting through the small speaker grill. My name is Serena Cole, I said. I stepped to the side, pulling Grace forward by the elbow. She looked like she was about to faint. This is Grace Cole. She is a U.S. citizen. There is an active arrest warrant for her in Chicago, Illinois, for financial fraud. I am surrendering her to your custody. Duncan's eyes widened slightly. His fingers paused over his keyboard. He looked at Grace, then back at me. Ma'am, wait right here. He picked up a phone on his desk and turned away. 2 minutes later, a heavy metal door next to the windows clicked open, and 2 armed embassy security officers stepped out. They flanked Grace. Grace Cole? One of them asked. She nodded, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. Please come with us, ma'am. ma'am. Grace turned to look at me one last time. Her eyes were begging for a reprieve. She was waiting for the safety net to deploy. She was waiting for me to pull out my American Express card and pay the problem away. She was waiting for me to play house. I gave her a single, definitive nod. Tell them the truth, Grace. It's the only currency you have left. She stepped through the metal door. It clicked shut behind her, sealing with a heavy, metallic thud. I walked out of the embassy and into the Parisian rain. I didn't take a cab back to the apartment. I walked the entire mile and a half, letting the cold air clear the adrenaline from my system. When I got back to the Marais, I sat at my zinc table and opened my laptop. Daniel thought he was playing chess, but he was playing with matches in a room full of gasoline. He had underestimated my willingness to let it all burn. I logged into my encrypted email and drafted a message to Silas. Grace is in federal custody at the embassy. They are processing her return. Now, we go on the offensive. I attached the credit union transaction ID for the $25,000 cashier's check Daniel had cashed. I didn't have the security footage, but I had something better. The day I set up that account 3 years ago, I had insisted on dual authentication for any withdrawal over $10,000. It was a failsafe I had completely forgotten about in the chaos of my departure. I logged into my old phone's cloud backup and pulled the SEMS logs from the day of my flight. There it was, an automated text from the credit union, timestamped at 6:14 p.m. Chicago time, while I was sitting at the terminal bar in O'Hare. Authentication code 8492. Do not share this code. Provide to teller to authorize check hashtag 001 for $25,000. And right below it, a text from Daniel to my old number, timestamped at 6:15 p.m. Just got an alert about a weird charge on the joint card. Did you get a verification text? Send it to me so I can clear it with fraud. I had replied with the code, thinking I was helping him fix a stolen card issue before I boarded my flight to leave him. He hadn't used the code to stop fraud. He used it to commit it. He used my own text message to authorize the withdrawal, effectively forging my digital signature at the teller window. I forwarded the entire SM's log to Silas. He didn't just drain the account. I typed. He committed wire fraud to bypass my security block, and then he perjured himself in court by claiming I did it. File the evidence. Call Detective Voss. Give her this. I hit send. My phone buzzed on the table. It was an email notification. Not from Silas. The sender name made my blood run instantly cold. Connor Cole. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the trackpad. Connor had vanished. He was the one who physically took the stolen $25,000 cashier's check from Daniel's desk. He was the golden child, the one Daniel had always protected fiercely. I clicked open the email. There was no text in the body, just a single audio file attachment, titled insurance.wowave. I plugged in my earphones and clicked play. There was a burst of static, followed by the muffled sound of a car engine running. Then, Daniel's voice, sounding frantic and strained. You can't just leave, Connor. I need that check back. The judge is going to ask for a full accounting of the marital assets by Friday. Then, Connor's voice, sharp and laced with the same entitled arrogance I had endured for a decade. You lied to me. You said Serena cleared out the accounts. You said she left us with nothing. But I saw the check, Dad. You took her money. You took the money you promised for my flight school, and you're hoarding it. I'm not hoarding it. I need it to pay Silas off, or to hire my own guy. I have to keep the narrative straight. If Serena's lawyers look too closely at the equity line, they'll see the 15 grand I wired to your mother. I am trying to keep Diane out of prison. I don't care about Diane. Connor yelled over the engine noise. She hasn't sent me a birthday card in 5 years. You blew my tuition on her mess, and now you want me to hand over the only cash we have left? No. I'm taking this check, I'm cashing it at a title loan place, and I'm gone. Connor, stop the car. If you take that money, I'll have no choice. I'll have to tell the judge Serena took it. I'll have to file a police report against her to cover the missing funds. Do whatever you want, Dad, Connor scoffed. You always do. The recording clicked off. I sat back in my chair, staring blindly at the screen. Connor hadn't just stolen the money. He had recorded his father confessing to the entire scheme. The theft, the perjury, the wire fraud, the cover-up for Diane. And then he had emailed it to me. Why? Why would Connor, who hated me, who called me a glorified wallet to my face, send me the exact piece of evidence I needed to destroy his father? A second email popped into my inbox from Connor. This one had text. I'm at a motel in Flagstaff. The title loan place wouldn't cash the check without your signature, because your name is printed on the original account line. Dad froze my credit cards. I have $40 in my pocket, and I'm out of gas. I'll give Silas the original recording and testify that Dad framed you, but you have to wire me $5,000 right now. If you don't, I delete the file and I throw the check in the desert. I let out a slow, steady breath. The apple truly hadn't fallen far from the tree. Connor was trying to extort me with his own father's confession. I looked at the clock. It was 3:00 p.m. in Chicago. Silas was still in his office. Detective Voss was still at her desk. I didn't reply to Connor. I didn't negotiate with terrorists, and I certainly didn't negotiate with 20-year-old boys who thought they could outsmart the woman who had managed their lives for 10 years. I forwarded the audio file and Connor's extortion email directly to Silas. Then, I picked up my phone and dialed the direct line for Detective Claire Voss. I set the phone down on the zinc table, the screen going black. The silence in the apartment came rushing back, thick and heavy. Outside, the Parisian rain tapped steadily against the window pane. I looked down at the email from Connor, the ultimatum, the $40 in his pocket, the threat to throw away a piece of paper that held 3 people's lives in the balance. 10 years. For 10 years I had paid the tuition, cleared the credit cards, smoothed over the arguments, and absorbed every sharp glance and bitter offhand comment. I had convinced myself that if I just held the perimeter tight enough, if I absorbed enough of the damage, eventually we would settle into something resembling a real family. But standing here in this quiet, drafty apartment 6,000 miles away, the whole structure looked ridiculous. They weren't a family drowning in bad luck. They were a group of adults who treated everyone around them like a resource to be harvested until the soil ran dry. I didn't wire Connor $5,000. I didn't even reply to his email. Instead, Instead, I took a screenshot of his message, attached the raw audio file, and sent the whole package to Silas with a 3-word note: handle the filing. Then I closed my laptop, packed my single carry-on bag, and checked out of the Mirai rental. By midnight, I was on a flight back to Chicago. I didn't return out of fear, or nostalgia, or a desperate desire to confront Daniel. I returned because you don't win a legal fight by remote control. If someone is trying to frame you for grand larceny and perjury in a court of law, you show up in the room. You sit in the wooden chair behind the defense table, you look the judge in the eye, and you hand over the hard copies. The flight was cold and turbulent. I didn't sleep. I drank black coffee from paper cups and watched the little glowing airplane icon creep slowly across the blue expanse of the Atlantic on the seatback screen. When we landed at O'Hare at 4:30 a.m., the air inside the jetway hit me like a physical blow, humid, heavy, smelling of jet fuel and industrial floor cleaner. Home, or what used to be home. I didn't go to the townhouse. I checked into the Drake Hotel under my maiden name, paid with a corporate card from my business account that Daniel's lawyers hadn't managed to touch, and slept for 4 hours. At 9:00 a.m., I walked into Silas Mercer's law office on LaSalle Street. Silas was sitting behind a desk covered in yellow legal pads and accordion folders. He looked like he hadn't slept either. His tie was loosened at the collar, and a half-eaten bagel sat cold on a paper napkin near his keyboard. "You look surprisingly well for a woman whose stepson tried to blackmail her from a motel in Arizona," Silas said, sliding a thick stack of papers across the desk toward me. "Sit down, Serena. We have a lot of dirt to dig through." "What's the status of the emergency freeze?" I asked, sitting in the leather armchair opposite him. "Lifted," Silas said flatly. "The moment I submitted the credit union's dual authentication text logs to Judge Halverson this morning at 8 o'clock. The temporary injunction was tossed out. The judge was, let's just say he was not pleased with Daniel's attorney. Filing a sworn affidavit claiming you stole 25 grand when there's an automated record of Daniel requesting the authorization code himself is a very quick way to lose all credibility in Cook County family court." I felt a small, hard knot in my chest untangle slightly. "And Detective Voss? Voss has the audio recording Connor sent you," Silas said, leaning back in his swivel chair. "She listened to it twice in my presence. Between the $15,000 cash advance Daniel took out to pay off Diane's creditors and the $25,000 cashier's check he tried to conceal, the state's attorney is looking at opening a formal investigation for financial fraud and obstruction. Daniel isn't just losing the divorce, Serena. He's looking at potential indictment." I looked at the window behind Silas. Below, the Chicago traffic moved in slow, gray lines along the wet asphalt. "Where is Grace?" Silas sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "She was repatriated late last night under federal escort. She's currently at her aunt's house in Evanston. Her credit is completely ruined. $85,000 in third-party collections under her name. Because she refused to press formal criminal charges against Diane while she was at the embassy, the police can't drop the fraud investigation on her automatically. She's stuck in a legal nightmare of her own making. And Connor? Still in Arizona, as far as we know. He tried to cash the cashier's check at a currency exchange in Flagstaff using a fake signature, but the teller flagged it because of the flag on the account. He ran out before the police arrived. He's currently broke, driving a car with a burnt-out alternator, and refusing to answer Daniel's calls. It was a complete, systematic collapse. In less than 3 weeks, the quiet, polished facade of the Cole family had dissolved into a pile of court summonses, collection notices, and frantic phone calls. "We have a status hearing scheduled for tomorrow afternoon at 2, Silas continued, tapping his pen against the pad. "Daniel's attorney, Garrett Tate, called me an hour ago. He sounded entirely defeated. He wants to talk settlement before we go in front of Judge Halverson again. He knows if we put that audio file into the public record, Daniel is finished. No settlement," I said quietly. Silas paused, looking at me over his glasses. "Serena, a settlement gets you out clean. You keep your consulting business, you take your personal stock portfolio back, you walk away with the townhouse equity you funded, and you never have to speak to these people again. If we fight this out in open court, it's going to get messy, expensive, and public. I don't want a settlement that sweeps his lies under the rug," I said, my voice steady, cold, and entirely devoid of anger. "I spent 10 years letting Daniel hide behind my silence. He told his kids I was a convenience. He told his friends I was overly sensitive. He told a judge under oath that I was a thief. We go to the hearing tomorrow. Silas, every document, every bank line, every text message goes into the record." Silas stared at me for a long moment. Then a faint, grim smile touched the corner of his mouth. "All right, tomorrow at 2. I left his office and spent the afternoon at a small diner near the river, eating a sandwich I barely tasted, reviewing the spreadsheets I had built years ago. It was strange looking back at those numbers. $1,200 for Connor's private tutoring, $4,500 for Grace's summer study abroad program in Spain, $12,000 to clear the joint tax liability from the year Daniel decided not to pay his quarterly estimates. Page after page of my own hard work, converted into quiet, unacknowledged domestic maintenance. At 4 p.m., my phone vibrated in my coat pocket. It was a text from an unknown local number. "Serena, it's Diane. I need to talk to you. Not about Daniel, about Grace. Please. She won't eat. She won't come out of the room. Just 5 minutes." I stared at the screen. Diane, the ghost mother who only showed up for holidays, who took credit for Grace's achievements, who used her own daughter's social security number to keep her own failed marketing business afloat. I replied with 4 words: "Meet me at the Drake." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the quiet, wood-paneled lounge on the ground floor of the hotel. The room was mostly empty, save for a couple of elderly men in suits drinking whiskey near the fireplace. The brass doors of the elevator slid open, and Diane walked into the lounge. She didn't look like the woman from the Oak Street bridal boutique, the one who stood on the pedestal, adjusting Grace's veil with a smug, victorious smile while her children humiliated me. Her expensive blonde highlights were overgrown, showing dark roots. Her tailored blazer looked slightly rumpled, and she wasn't wearing any jewelry. No Range Rover key fob in her hand, no designer handbag on her her shoulder. She spotted me and walked over, her heels clicking softly on the oriental rug. She sat down across from me without asking, placing a small, worn leather purse on her lap. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. Her voice lacked its usual smooth, performative charm. It sounded thin, like dry paper. "You have 4 minutes left," I said, looking at my watch. "What do you want, Diane?" Diane swallowed hard, her hands clutching the top of her purse. "Daniel is trying to pin everything on me. He told Detective Voss that I forced Grace to sign those loan documents 3 years ago. He's telling everyone that I stole from my own daughter." "You did steal from your own daughter," I said flatly. "You took out $85,000 in commercial loans and credit cards using her identity because your business was insolvent. That isn't a misunderstanding, Diane. That's a felony. I was going to pay it back," she hissed, leaning forward, her eyes wide and bloodshot. "I had a client contract in the works that would have covered the whole balance." Grace knew I was using her credit to get the business through a rough patch. Grace was 19, I interrupted. "She didn't know what a personal guarantee meant. She signed what you handed her because you're her mother, and she wanted your approval. And instead of fixing it, you let her sit in a police station in Paris." Diane's mouth worked silently for a moment, like she was trying to find a script that worked, but realized none of her usual lines applied here. "Daniel paid you $15,000 out of my home equity," I continued, leaning in slightly. "He took a cash advance to quiet your creditors so Grace's wealthy in-laws wouldn't find out before the wedding. Did you really think that was going to hold off the ears, Diane? Did you really think a $15,000 check was going to fix $85,000 in defaulted debt? Daniel offered it to me," she said defensively, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself and looked around the quiet lounge. "He said you had plenty of money. He said you were obsessed with keeping the family looking perfect, so you'd cover it eventually anyway. He told me you'd absorb it just like you absorbed everything else." There it was, the quiet, unspoken agreement between Daniel and his ex-wife. For 10 years, they had operated on the exact same premise. Serena will pay for it. Serena will clean it up. Serena will eat the cost because Serena wants to play house. I looked at Diane, this woman who had spent a decade treating me like an intruder while quietly harvesting the benefits of my labor, and I felt a strange, profound sense of relief. The illusion was completely gone. There was no nobility in endurance. There was no virtue in letting yourself be used by people who didn't even respect you enough to lie convincingly. "I'm not absorbing anything," I said softly. "Not a single dollar. Not a single debt. Grace is facing criminal charges, Serena," Diane pleaded, her composure completely shattering into desperate panic. "If she goes to court, they'll call me to testify. They'll ruin my reputation. They'll take my house." "You don't have a house, Diane. You lease a condo in River North that you haven't paid rent on in 2 months," I said, pulling my phone out and checking the time. "Your 4 minutes are up." I stood up, leaving a $20 bill on the table for my unused tea, and walked toward the elevators. "Serena, wait," Diane called out behind me, her voice cracking with a mixture of rage and terror. "You ruined this family. They were fine before you showed up with your money and your stupid expectations." I didn't turn around. I didn't answer. The elevator doors slid open, I stepped inside, and the heavy brass doors closed between us, with a quiet, satisfying click. That night, I stayed in my hotel room. I didn't order room service. I didn't watch the news. I sat by the window, watching the city lights reflect off the dark surface of Lake Michigan, feeling the quiet, steady rhythm of my own life returning to me, piece by piece. The next afternoon, at 1:45 p.m., I walked into the Cook County Courthouse with Silas. The hallway outside courtroom 402 was busy, lawyers in dark suits hurrying past, bailiffs calling out names, families sitting nervously on wooden benches. Standing near the tall double doors at the end of the hall was Daniel. He looked 10 years older than he had 3 weeks ago in the Oak Street boutique. His suit looked loose on him, his hair was uncombed, and his hands were jammed deep into his trousers pockets. Standing next to him was his attorney, Garrett Tate, a sharp-featured man holding a thick leather briefcase, looking thoroughly miserable. When Daniel saw me approaching, he took a step forward, his lips moving as if to say my name. I didn't stop. I didn't glance at him. I walked right past him into the courtroom, my heels clicking firmly against the terrazzo floor, and took my seat at the petitioner's table. 2 minutes later, Judge Halverson, a tall, stern man with thick gray eyebrows, stepped up onto the bench. "Cole versus Cole," the bailiff announced. Garrett Tate stood up immediately from the respondent's table. "Your Honor, before we begin, the respondent would like to request a brief recess to discuss a potential global settlement with petitioner's counsel." "No, Your Honor," Silas said, standing up smoothly next to me. "The petitioner does not consent to a recess. We are prepared to proceed with the status hearing regarding the fraudulent affidavit filed by the respondent on July 14th. Judge Halverson looked down from the bench, his gaze settling squarely on Daniel, who looked like he wanted to shrink into the floorboards. "Mr. Tate," Judge Halverson said, his voice slow and heavy, "your client submitted a sworn statement under penalty of perjury claiming that Miss Cole removed $25,000 from a joint account without authorization. I have since reviewed the bank's digital authorization logs, which indicate your client personally requested the transfer code." Tate cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "Your Honor, my client was under extreme emotional distress at the time of the filing. There was a misunderstanding regarding the electronic signature." "There was no misunderstanding, Mr. Tate," Judge Halverson cut in, his voice dropping an octave. "That is perjury. And if your client utters another word in this courtroom that contradicts the objective digital records provided by the bank, I will refer this matter directly to the state's attorney for criminal prosecution." Daniel flinched as if he had been struck. He reached out to grab the edge of the table to steady himself. "Now," Judge Halverson said, flipping a page in his folder, "let's discuss the division of marital property, the townhouse equity, and the immediate dismissal of the respondent's petition for spousal support." For the next 45 minutes, I sat quietly beside Silas as the legal architecture of my past 10 years was disassembled, piece by piece, under the cold fluorescent lights of courtroom 402. The townhouse was ordered to be listed for immediate sale, with the entire equity portion returning to me to satisfy the mortgage payments I had had made from my separate business accounts during Daniel's unemployment. The emergency fund was formally credited back to my estate, with Daniel held personally liable for the missing $25,000 cashier's check. His petition for spousal support was dismissed with prejudice. When the judge finally slammed his gavel down and adjourned the session, the courtroom went quiet. Garrett Tate packed his briefcase in silence, handed Daniel a business card without looking at him, and walked out the side exit. Daniel sat alone at the long table, staring blankly at the empty wooden bench where the judge had been sitting moments before. He looked small. He looked like a man who had spent his whole life relying on the generosity of women, his ex-wife's schemes, my money, his daughter's compliance, and had finally run out of credit. Silas gathered his papers, snapping his briefcase shut. That went about as well as it possibly could have, Serena. The court order will be signed by Friday. Thank you, Silas, I said. We walked out of the courtroom together. As I crossed the threshold into the hallway, I heard heavy, hurried steps behind me. Serena, please. I stopped and turned. Daniel was standing 5 feet away, breathing heavily, his hands trembling at his sides. There was no anger left in his face, no condescension, no arrogance, just the raw, frantic panic of a man who realized the safety net was gone, and there was nothing below him but air. Serena, please, he stammered, taking a small step closer. Connor is in Arizona. He won't talk to me. Grace is moving into a studio apartment in Evanston, and her lawyer is preparing a fraud suit against Diane. The townhouse is going to be sold. I don't have anywhere to go. I looked at him, really looked at him. The man I had spent a decade trying to love. The man I had drained my stock portfolio to save from foreclosure. The man who sat on a velvet sofa on Oak Street while his daughter called me a glorified wallet and told me not to ruin her special day with my dramatic sensitivity. You have the townhouse for 30 days, Daniel, I said, my voice completely level, calm, and quiet. After that, you should probably read the room. I turned on my heel and walked down the long, bright corridor toward the exit, leaving him standing alone in the quiet hall. 3 months later, the townhouse on Oak Street sold at a public auction for 70% of its assessed value. The proceeds went first to clear the primary mortgage, then to settle the back taxes, and whatever remained was drawn into the court-ordered ledger to satisfy the judgments. Daniel didn't attend the closing. His lawyer told Silas that Daniel had moved into a small furnished room above a dry cleaner's on the far north side, working 3 days a week as a freelance estimator for commercial contractors. I didn't feel triumph when Silas read me the final accounting over the phone. I just felt clean. My consulting business was fully operational again. The temporary operational freezes long since lifted by the State Appellate Division after Silas submitted the comprehensive audit of my separate assets. My office downtown still had the same mahogany desk, the same leather chair, and the same view of the Gray River moving steadily toward the lake. Grace called me once, late on a Tuesday evening in October. Her number wasn't saved in my phone anymore, but I recognized the area code. Serena, she said, her voice small and hesitant against the background hum of what sounded like a public library fluorescent light. Grace, I answered. I didn't hang up, but I didn't invite her in, either. I got a job, she said, at an accounting firm in Evanston. Just data entry, filing invoices. The state's attorney dropped the grand larceny charges because I agreed to cooperate with the trustee regarding my mother's tax filings. But my credit is still shot. I'm renting a basement room from Aunt Miriam. I'm glad you found a job, Grace, I said honestly. It's a good start. Are you ever coming back to Chicago? She asked, a tentative, fragile hope creeping into her tone. The old reflex, looking for a hand to reach out from the dark. I looked out my office window at the amber streetlights burning through the autumn dusk. On the credenza behind my desk sat a single passport, a set of keys to my own apartment, and a fresh ledger with no name on the cover except my own. No, Grace, I said softly. I'm staying right here. You have my number if you ever need a reference for a job, but I'm not fixing the rest of it for you. You have to do that yourself. There was a long silence on the line. Not an angry silence, just the heavy weight of reality settling into place. Okay, she whispered. Goodbye, Serena. Goodbye, Grace. I tapped the screen to end the call, placed the phone face down on the wood, and went back to work.